We have the great privilege today to continue in our learning of Mesillas Yesharim, and we pick up the Ramchal says as follows. So remember again in yesterday's shir, we discussed the idea that the Ramchal pointed out that people are often drawn to more intellectual pursuits, and as a result often neglect what he calls shlemos ha'avoda, finding completion in one's service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the learning ultimately about love of Hashem, reverence of Hashem, clinging to Hashem, and the essence of Chasidus, personal piety. So the Ramchal says the reason people neglect these areas is not because they're unimportant. If you ask a person, is it important to learn about love of Hashem, reverence of Hashem, clinging to Hashem, personal piety? Of course a person will say yes. So again, if everyone acknowledges that these areas of Jewish learning are important, so why do people neglect them? As Ramchal started off, often people neglect these basic fundamental areas of study. Again, the learning about what it means to love Hashem, what it means to revere Hashem, what it means to cling to Hashem, what it means to cultivate a sense of personal piety. The reason people often neglect studying these areas is because they're pashut. Our people think they're pashut. It's obvious, it's simple, it's straightforward. People just don't feel that these areas really require any significant devotion, dedication, or attention. The This is actually fascinating. In fact, if you ask often people about who learns about these things, about loving Hashem, revering Hashem, a sense of clinging, a sense of personal piety, people often assume, that's kind of for the unlearned. That's for those who are not intellectually astute. It's for those who are a little bit more simple in their approach. In other words, often you'll find people, so in other words, the intellectually astute are more focused on the more, we'll call it intellectually riveting aspects of learning of Yiddishkeit, or again in worldly matters. Who learns about these things like love of Hashem, reverence of Hashem, clinging to Hashem, personal piety? The unlearned chevra. And this is incredible. Sometimes when you see a person who is steeped in the pursuit of personal piety, we often associate such an individual as being almost a little bit unlearned or intellectually simple. V'ulam, Toldos haminag hazeh ra'os ma'od l'chachamim u'levilti chachamim. Ki gorem sheme'ele u'me'ele yechser ha'chasidus ha'amiti v'yeh yakar ma'od limsa osa ba'olam. So we're going to see, by the way, that in the Ramchal's model, we'll discuss how the Sefer is set up, in future shiurim. But we're going to see that one of the things that ultimately we aspire to is to be able to reach a level of chasidus, to be able to really become individuals who are truly pious. But the path to personal piety, what Ramchal is suggesting, is not really paved through, deep intellectual pursuits. As he said in yesterday's shir, it's really paved with learning and reinforcing some of the basics that all too often we just take for granted. So the great irony is that often those who are intellectually astute, or feel they're intellectually astute, will often neglect the cultivation of personal piety, because they'll feel, that's a process, or that's a study that's reserved for those who are a little bit more simple, and they lose out on becoming a chassid. We lose out ultimately on what it means to really become a truly pious individual. The Ramchal goes on, he says, Ki yechsa min hachachamim lemiut iyunam bo, v'yechsa min habilti chachamim lemiut hasagasam also, ad she'idamru b'nei adam she'chasidus talui ba'amiras mizmorim harbe, v'duyim arukim ma'od, tzomos kashim, utvilos kerach v'shalag, kulam dvarim ha'she'in ha'sechal nachbaim, v'nadashokita. So what ends up happening is people don't really understand what it takes to become a chassid. What does it take to become a pious individual? So often when you think about piety, people often associate that with davening a lot, saying many mizmorim, or vidui, long confessions, difficult fasts, immersion in cold water and ice in the snow, and all different things that the truth is don't appeal to the intellect. And that's often because, says the Ramchal, is because we don't take the time to really learn these basic fundamentals. What does it mean to be a pious individual? And again, starts with a process. What does it mean to love Hashem? What does it mean to revere Hashem? What does it mean to cling to Hashem? All of these things set the stage for personal piety. But if I never take the time to go ahead and really learn these basics, and again, so many of these things which are at least initially obvious, but I never take the time to really learn them, to really cultivate an understanding, true chasidus, true piety escapes me. V'chasidus ha'amiti, true piety, hanirtze v'hanechmad, rachok mitzyor sechlenu, ki zeh davar pashat, milsa de la ramya leidinish, lavadaite. True chasidus, being a true chassid, as I mentioned in the last year, he's not, of course, referring to a chassid over here as a student of the Baal Shem Tov, like we think of a chassid today. He's talking about the concept of personal piety, the concept which is so beautiful and so wanted and so necessary, but often becomes so far from our imagination because we haven't learned what it really entails. Va'afa pi shekvar kuvuim belev kala adam hayashar haschalosav yisodosav. So therefore says the Ramchal, but again, if we don't take the time, even though every single person at the end of the day, I know that I want a sense of personal piety, I know that I want to achieve it, but at the end of the day, if I don't learn what it is, you could see the details necessary for personal piety, but you won't recognize him. You could experience the details necessary for personal piety, but you won't feel it because you don't know what it is that you're looking for. So the Ramchal really reinforcing the same idea from the previous shir. The need to go ahead and sometimes get back to basics. The basics of loving Hashem, revering Hashem, clinging to Hashem, all to create a sense of personal piety. And all too often, the reason why we don't accomplish these things is because we think, I'm an intellectual, I'm smart, so I'm into the things that will engage me intellectually, and we assume that chasidus, the pursuit of personal piety, is not an intellectual pursuit, and therefore we kind of just ignore it. But the Ramchal says, I'm creating a sefer that's not going to teach you new things. It's going to review a lot of basics, a lot of fundamentals, but reinforce within us the pathway to personal piety. We'll stop here for today, wishing everyone a wonderful day.